This episode is brought to you by Anchor.fm. If you haven't heard of Anchor, you should definitely check them out. It's a super easy tool that anyone can use to create and distribute their podcast. It has everything you need, and you can do it all from your computer or even your phone. Need your podcast cover art? There's a tool. Music and sound effects? They have you covered. Want to record on the fly? It's easy with the app. Now you may be saying to yourself, I already have a podcast. No worries, just create your account, upload, and publish to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. Looking for some walking around money? Anchor connects you with advertisers who match your brand. It's a one-stop shop for all of your podcasting needs. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started.
You're listening to BizQuik. This is where Julie and Corey provide quick and useful information to small business owners. BizQuik is the podcast where small business owners get to showcase their businesses and receive expert advice and guidance in areas many entrepreneurs struggle with. And you, the listener, get solutions, tips, and tricks on real-world topics that many small business owners face. Julie and Corey are the experts small businesses hire when they need solutions. And the BizQuik podcast is just one way they deliver those solutions. Let's start the show.
Welcome to BizQuik. I'm Julie.
And I'm Corey.
And on today's show, we have Dom Einhorn. Dom is the founder of Uniqorn Incubator Accelerator. He's out of France, but before we bring him on, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about incubators and, well, not so much incubators. We're going to talk about funding for startups and the pros and cons of having funding when you launch your startup.
Or not having funding when you launch your startup, which a lot of people have that problem as well. So,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. That was a complicated intro. Basically, we're going to talk about launching your startup and the pros and cons of having funding and not having funding.
Do you want to try that again?
No, I think we're going to go with this.
All right, let's run with it.
Let's run with it. Sometimes you're not perfect.
Sometimes you're not perfect. But anyway, yeah, there's obviously a significant benefit to having financial backing when you start a business.
Well, yeah, I guess one of the benefits to having financial backing would be that you're not so stressed all the time over money.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge pro there. And I mean if you get somebody to back your business, to give you money, and not a rich family member, it's an actual investor, somebody who's looked at your business plan and vetted you and what you do. I mean, that's a huge boost to your confidence level as well.
Yeah. We recently on an episode talked to Jonathan Federa, and he said something about, financing for your small business that I hadn't really considered before, where, you look at like taking out, a term loan or SBA loan or whatever, right? And he mentioned very briefly the downside of getting funding from a family member and the stress that puts on the family relationships. And I don't know why, but I had never really thought about that before. I guess because I was always thinking, of course, if you're going to take a loan out from a family member, you're going to pay it back. But what happens if the business fails? So, getting funding from somebody who's in your family is not always the best avenue to take for your business.
Did you never think about that because nobody in your family would lend you money?
No, that's absolutely not it. That's funny though. It's funny because it's true.
Yeah.
It's not true.
No, it is. Being somebody myself who I've had no problem borrowing money from anybody, but yes, it's definitely a lot easier to borrow it from a nameless, faceless bank, especially nowadays when you have all these online solutions where it's like, oh, well, whatever, it's such and such company.com. Granted, I have paid back everything that I've ever borrowed, but it's just a lot easier to do it because if you let somebody down, you're really only letting yourself down.
Yeah. Yeah. Lendmemoney.com or something. It
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
exists actually. Yeah. It probably does. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So what are the what's the downside or some of the downsides, the cons to having a backer, like going through an incubator or something and getting backing?
Well, not so much the incubator. Because I mean, I think the incubator's got more of a stake in your business in terms of, because obviously they want to see you succeed. It's almost like hiring a consultant or whatever to a degree, where that company, that business, that person, whoever it is they have some sort of stake in the game. But I mean, one of the downsides is it's not your money. Like, especially if you're bringing little to nothing to the table, if you're just bringing an idea, you're bringing technology, your sweat equity. If you don't have skin in the game, it's a lot easier for you to walk away. Like, if things are getting tough, if it's not working out the way that you want it to, you can just say, all right, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's be real. It's generally not an easy path when you're starting a business. I would assume too that there might be a little bit, you have less control.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the deals that you work out with whoever the investor is. You're going to have less control. You're giving up equity, obviously, which it can be a good thing or a bad thing. If you're talking about a $1 billion company, giving up 20%, 30%, no big deal. If you're only planning on making $1 million this year, maybe 30% is a significant part of your business, because it is.
Yeah, I would agree. There are a couple things that I'm really interested in asking Dom. The first one is, like, how does one start an incubator? Like, I'm very curious about that, but I'm also super curious about the name, Unicorn Incubator Accelerator. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, you are getting hung up on that quite a bit.
Yeah, well, it
probably sounds way cooler in French.
I bet it does.
To be honest.
I bet it does. Yeah.
But yeah, the obvious, the downside there of giving up control and all of that is an issue. But I think, and personally, it depends on the deal. I think it's worth it if you have something that could potentially be a multi-million dollar company or idea or project. It's definitely worth it, because especially in tech these days, you need that money.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna make the awesome new app or whatever it is, the competition's huge. I mean, you're competing against the Amazons and Facebooks of the world.
Correct. And I would say too that if you've started a small business, if you've started a business, at some point you've been stressed over money. Like, at some point in the journey of that business, you've been stressed, right? So, being, completely transparent, in our first year, we've had moments where we've been like, okay, what do we do next? Right. And there's not a lot of joy in stressing over money, right? It's kind of one of the worst things to go through, is that particular level of stress and trying to solve that problem. Now, for us, we're pretty creative problem solvers, and the stress was fairly minor for us, but it was certainly there. So I think when you are starting a business, if you have somebody who's backing you financially, that just frees you up to focus a lot more on the business and solving the business problems rather than the funding problems.
Yeah. And having somebody like an incubator, having, like, if they have your back, like, for instance, Dom would, you don't have to go out and find the money. That's their job. They're going to go out and find the money for you. If you start, for whatever reason, you start running out of money, you blow through your budget, whatever. If it's something that they believe in, they're going to go out and do that work for you. Yeah, you might have to go pitch the idea. You might have to prepare a presentation, whatever it is, but you're not out there knocking on people's doors asking for money.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. So you've kind of got a partner in helping you on the financial side.
Yeah.
And they've launched businesses before, so they can help with all of the startup pieces. So
not to mention the networking and everything that comes with it as well.
That's true. That's very true. Plus, I think he's in France, so he's probably somewhere near wine country.
Yeah.
So that's always a benefit too.
That is always a benefit.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. You think we should bring him in from the waiting room?
Yep. Let's do it.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have Dom Einhorn.
Hey everyone, we wanted to tell you about our latest course, Foundation 52, that will be available on February 15th. This course is built to provide tools and techniques every week of the year, and is designed to improve your small business. If you're thinking about starting a business, this is a great resource for you as well. We walk you through sales, customer service, disaster planning, growth strategies, and so much more. Head on over to SB Pace to sign up today.
Okay, welcome back to the show. We've got our guest, Dom Einhorn. He's the founder of Uniqorn Incubator Accelerator. That's a mouthful.
Thanks for having me on, Julie and Corey. Pleasure being here.
Welcome to the show. Or as we like to say, welcome to the big show.
Yeah.
Welcome to France.
Yes. That forgot to mention that Dom is out of France, but he's got a business accelerator there in France, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I want to jump in first. You've got a pretty interesting history in business, some failures and some successes. Could you walk us through what that was like for you?
Sure. I started early on in my early 20s. I moved initially from France to the US in March of 1993. When I did move to the US, I already knew I wanted to launch a startup. At that point in time, 28 years ago, the US was a much better place to start a new business than France was. A lot less bureaucracy, easier access to anything the internet was providing. In fact, at that point in time, we didn't call it the internet, we called it the information superhighway initially, for those of you who are old enough to remember. 9600 baud modems, for those of you who are old enough as well. They made the very clunky noise. I started again 93, 94. I founded initially the first online art auction there ever was between 94 and 95. The reason why I did start this auction is because I had a number of artists as clients, all of which had one thing in common: they were starving. I was starving as well. And for most all of them, in lieu of cash, they actually paid me in art, which I couldn't eat, but which I still have today. And I'm glad I do, because a couple of them made it pretty big. One of them recently passed away, unfortunately, rest in peace. But the value of his art is probably 50-fold what it was back when I was originally representing him. Every once in a while, you get lucky, especially if you push your luck. But in terms of failures, as you mentioned, Corey, I have my own philosophy of failures. For me, failures are a necessary stepping stone to success. And if I look at my career in particular, early on in my career, I was selling websites when no one wanted the website, and most people didn't know what a website was. We're now talking 93, 94, 95. It was literally like selling ice to Eskimos. And I was pitching 36 people to close one sale, one website. So I came up with my own rule. I call it a rule of 36/1. I had to go through 35 failures before having a mini success. And despite failing 95% of the time, several years later, I sold that business for roughly $12 million US. For those of you who are listening, that's probably a lesson to take home. You don't have to hit home runs every single time. Again, much worse than Michael Jackson, who famously said, "I miss a lot more shots than I made." I missed 95% of my shots, and yet ultimately was deemed a success.
Yes.
Great.
So when you said that you were selling websites, like the designed websites, or like
exactly. It's funny you asked that question, because you wouldn't use that term anymore today. It wasn't actually, there were not finished websites that we were reselling. We're actually building websites at the early stage when no one had one. And funny enough, too, the first business that gave me a shot, which I think is still around today, was a pregnancy device for horses. Out of all things, we looked at this and we're like, this is unbelievable. The big brands don't want a website. The people that really need it, the people who are actually selling electronics, don't want a website. And the first guy who gave me a shot with this guy with his pregnancy device for horses. It was almost ironic.
That's weird. And funny, and it's an interesting thing that we always kind of talk about is you never know where the opportunities are going to come from. You think that you've got a plan and you can count on these people, or you're going to go over there and do this. And then the next thing you know, you turn around and you're making a website for a horse pregnancy company.
It's what a lot of people call luck, right? So there is no such thing as luck. Again, if you fail 95% of the time, and then in the 96th time you actually make a sale, that's not lucky. you're pushing your luck, you're going through the pain. So it does take a tremendous amount of grit, resilience, and discipline in order to actually put up with that. And I would say most people are not willing to do that. So, again, we're running an incubator here. I can tell you out of experience, I've been in this business now for 28 years. I cannot demonstrate it scientifically, but I can tell you empirically that 5% of the people have what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So nothing wrong about that, right? Look, we need artists, we need doctors, we need other people, overwhelmingly so other people every single day. So don't be shy, don't be timid about not having what it takes to be an entrepreneur, because you're gonna get knocked down. You have to have the ability to get up, and you have to do it with a smile.
Right. Agreed. I mean, it takes a lot of grit to be an entrepreneur, especially these days. What exactly is an incubator?
That's a good,
Accelerator.
good question. I tend to forget to define what we do because I live it on a day-to-day basis. But the easiest way to describe to you guys what an incubator does is, we all know what an incubator is in a hospital environment, right? So premature baby is born. To make sure the baby is nursed back to health and becomes stronger and eventually leaves the hospital, is we stick it into an incubator, right? We do the exact same thing with startups. At the onset, businesses that just start out are obviously the weakest, hence the high failure rates that we all know. What we do is we provide it with the nurturing ecosystem to first survive, eventually grow up, and ultimately thrive. I'm not sure if one video, but this is what an incubator does. This is my business card, right? For those of you who can't see it, incubation first is the crawl stage, acceleration is the walk stage, and then you thrive, you actually run. Crawl, walk, run. We've all heard that one before.
Right.
This is exactly what an incubator accelerator does, right? There are two very delineated stages. Incubation usually takes 3 to 6 months, depending on the level of maturity of the startup that you're bringing under your fold. Acceleration can last years. Acceleration basically means that once the business is solid enough, sound enough to survive, we want to make sure that it can thrive. And usually the way that happens is we work a lot on customer acquisition, on sales and business development. So let's assume a mobile app that you incubate initially. First, you want to make sure that it doesn't break. So you want to have the right engineering around it. You want to make sure the hosting is right. You want to make sure it has the right UI, UX design, user-facing design. And then you may get the first 500, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 downloads. And you see user acquisition, user traction taking place. At that point in time, we would typically move that startup into our accelerator to take that product market fit that we've just demonstrated at a small level and scale it exponentially.
So when you're looking at when you're working with startups, are you finding them, or are they coming to you?
Initially, and that's interesting about, I guess, what makes us different is I initially was the entrepreneur, right? So when I started in this business, there was no such thing. The term incubator accelerator didn't exist outside of the hospital environment, right? It started in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it was so much harder to start and launch a business. It was so much more expensive to launch a business in the 90s. To give you one very telling example, I recently went through one of my storage boxes and I came across an invoice that I paid in March of 1998. It was a bandwidth invoice, itemized as such. I spent $8,000 in March of 1998 for just bandwidth that we were using. And today I'm using 1,000 times more bandwidth, and it costs me roughly $15 a month. So you see that ratio, right?
Yeah.
Another example for those of you again who are old enough, in the late 90s, early 2000s, if you wanted to launch an e-commerce website, which was somewhat of a novelty back then, you needed to have a database. The only database that was around was an Oracle database, and we were paying $32,000 US per instance of a database, and we were running 4, right? So unless you would either had enough money to get started, unless you had $500,000 or $1 million to get started, you had no point being in business. You would outspend yourself within the first 3 or 4 months and you'd be done. Fast forward a quarter century, everything has democratized, everything has demonetized. Today, the kid in sub-Saharan Africa can just launch a competitor to what I do just as easily as I can, because I don't want to say money is no longer the object, but it's becoming less and less an object because of this demonetization effect, right? If we're taking this device, a smartphone, let's remember, when the smartphone first launched, I needed a briefcase to carry it around. It was super bulky, it cost a fortune, and it hardly ever worked. Then that smartphone became smaller, 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 cheaper, 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 and today does everything, right? So when economists calculate GDP, this device, any smartphone that we're holding in our hands today, is only accounted for the raw materials that it costs to actually produce this device. What is embedded in that device, which is $1 million worth of technology, is not accounted for at all, like it didn't even exist. So when we're calculating GDP, we're making a huge error today, because the real value, aside from the raw material, is not accounted for. And this device has been getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, while the performance, the price performance, has grown exponentially 1,000-fold.
So who are your who's your target market in terms of customers, and are they all local to France, or are they worldwide, or?
So right in terms of just general management inside the incubator, we're roughly 30 people today from 18 different countries. And actually something that makes us unique, it's not by design, it's by pure chance, more women than men, right? Which is very rare in the tech space. Try to go to Silicon Valley, you'll see a ratio of 95% male versus females, right? It's pretty rare. We've taken a global approach right from the start. Again, that's due to my own career. I've been traveling all over the place, lived in the US, lived in Central America, had offices in the Philippines, offices in the US, offices in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been kind of like, no matter how good you are internally, there's always someone smarter outside, right? That's just by definition the way it happens. So I've been drafting talent from all over the place because they just happen to live everywhere. Smart young people are everywhere today, right? In terms of startups, we also have a very strong international flair, very similar to the makeup of our management team, where we have startups from the US, from Canada, from Spain, from France, all over the place. So we're completely agnostic when it comes to that. What we look for are outstanding projects and extraordinary individuals. This may sound stupid, but usually what I say is it's hard to build something extraordinary with ordinary people, right? We call it extraordinary for a reason. And that little extra, usually in my book, in my experience, is that an amazing grit, that amazing hustle, the ability to get up when you get knocked down, because we're all going to be facing that, right? For those of you who have started the business, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because if you're still in business today, it means you got back up after you get knocked down.
Okay, I want to go back to the question I asked earlier, because I think we got sidetracked and didn't actually answer it. Or if we did,
my apologies, getting late in France.
That's okay. We're covering a lot of ground here. So when you are taking on clients at the incubator, are they coming to you or are you going to them? Like, how do you partner up with somebody, and how do you fund that project, or do they come with funding? So really two questions.
Yeah. So initially I had a very strong network, always have had a strong network that took me 25 years to build. So I've always had a good solid number of projects by way of referrals. I've never advertised, for example, right, to get those projects. I've always been aligned with investors who have worked with me on projects that come with me with new projects. In some cases, say, hey, Dom, you and your team take care of all the incubation, the acceleration, all the marketing, or I'm not putting my money in. And they're actually dictating that to the startup entrepreneurs. So obviously the startup entrepreneur has in that point, that scenario, no choice but to contact us. Today, many years later, on a bad day, we get 80 pitches, 80 decks sent to us. On a good day, 150 and more. So we don't even have a chance where we have to build internal filters where, I'm sure you get the same messages on LinkedIn if somebody just attaches a deck and sends it to you without even saying hello, right?
Yes.
That means goodbye, right? You don't say hello, it's an automatic goodbye. It's kind of like the first rule of thumb. That eliminates 20 to 25% of them. Then other ones come and say, hey, John, I'm sorry, buddy. My name is Dom. Next, cut and paste, bad cut and paste, see the next guy. All right, so once you go through these filters, internally, we assess a project first depending on financial viability. So I have a partner of mine who's a CFA. He's American. He's been on Wall Street, spent 25 years on Wall Street. He actually, before it reaches my desk, makes sure there is viability from a financial perspective. Once it comes to me, because I'm a marketer by trade, the first thing that I look at is our ability to add value to that project. If I see that we can quickly, efficiently, relatively less resources than what usually happens, produce that value, I'll probably engage and dig deeper. If it's something that just strongly deviates from our core, we're probably not going to take it. Our core, first of all, we only do tech. Secondly, we are doing tech in very specific domains, because today, when you say you do tech, everything is touched by tech, right? So, for example, we're in a rural area. Until very recently, I had never done agri-tech, agricultural technologies. But I've got more and more pressure, good pressure, that I'm now slowly warming up to the idea of actually doing some food tech, some agri-tech, which I had never done before. But our core domain would be fintech, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, educational technologies, specifically in the B2C, in the business to consumer, on the business to consumer side, because of our ability to market to large audiences, which is something we've developed over many years. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, and when somebody approaches you, are you helping them get funding?
Oh, forget that part. Yeah. So usually I'm the first money in personally, right? There's not a single startup that we're currently incubating inside Uniqorn. Unicorn, by the way, is obviously play on words. For those of you who are in the tech space, a unicorn in the tech space is a company that's valued at $1 billion or more, which was usually startup entrepreneurs are aspiring to. And then secondly, my last name, Einhorn, in German means unicorn as well. Right? So that's a little play on words. But yes, we're, as of today, always first money in. So either myself first and foremost, or myself along with a group of investors whom I've worked with for a long period of time. So it's kind of like a seal of approval, a validation stamp. When I go out and I raise more money, I always have skin in the game first, right? So that adds a tremendous level of authority and credibility when you go out and you're pitching somebody else. I'm already in.
Right.
Now, I understand if you don't like the deal, if you want to walk away, but at least you cannot tell me that I don't have skin in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, we are running out of time here. So before we go, can you tell our listeners where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think I'm the only Dom Einhorn on LinkedIn. DOM as in Mary. Einhorn is EINHORN. Website is unicornincubator.com. That's unicorn with a Q. Email dom@unicornincubator.com.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the show today and telling our listeners all about an incubator accelerator. It was a really interesting conversation.
Yes, it
and
was.
Thanks to our listeners. We'll put all of Dom's information in the show notes for everybody who wants to reach out to him.
And if you want to connect with us, you can go to our websites, sbpace.com or bizquickpodcast.com, and you can connect with us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
And while you're out on the internet, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast, like us, and give us a review. We love feedback.
We do. And you can reach out about any topics that you want us to cover. If you want to be a guest, head on over to bizquickpodcast.com and you can fill out the form there. And while you're on the internet, go buy our book. We've got a #1 bestseller on Amazon. It is Seriously Now What? A Small Business Guide to Disaster Preparedness. And we have a digital workbook download on our website.
Yeah, it's a really good book. We encourage you to read it. I'm Julie.
And I'm Corey.
And this was BizQuik, helping small businesses across the globe.